This is Money Mind on CNA938, where we also take a keen interest, not only just about financial affairs, but also career-related matters. How's your career looking? Are you moving in the direction that your head and heart want to? Have you ever paused to look back at the path you've taken and reassess how your career has progressed?
Well, that's what our guest recommends. In fact, she strongly advises you to connect the dots in your life. Individual dots or nodes may appear insignificant on their own, but when you connect them all up, you'll begin to see a pattern, a journey, and a picture emerging of where you've been that's led to where you are today. And this will also help you appreciate and be keenly aware of the dots up ahead that will also shape your future.
Well, right now we have with us Shirley Taylor, founder and CEO of STTS Training. Shirley is a communications expert who's a global speaker, trainer, and also author. She's written 16 books, almost all to do with email and business writing skills. And her latest book that she'll be launching in a couple of days is based on her own journey of connecting the dots in her life and how they've led her to achieve what she has in her career today. Shirley, good to have you back on our program today. How are you?
I'm really good. Thank you, Stanley. And we learn. Lovely to be here.
Now, Shirley, take us back to the time that you were writing this book. Did it all happen during the pandemic, especially when Singapore went into circuit breaker mode and you had all that time stuck at home to be able to put some writing down?
Actually, it didn't. This book's been like a journey for many, many years, a real labor of love. And I didn't write during that time. I'd actually delivered the final manuscript to the publishers early March, just before I went on a trip to the UK. But when I came back to Singapore in the middle of March, way earlier than I wanted to, I was 2 weeks on stay home notice, and then we were into circuit breaker. So during that time, I was lucky because I'd sent the manuscript to the publishers without 3 little sections. So half of one chapter, the introduction and everything. So circuit breaker was good for me just to knuckle down and crack on with all the missing bits.
And did the circuit breaker itself contribute a chapter or two in this book?
I mention it. I mention lockdown and I mention COVID-19. I mention it a lot because I think it's given me a lot to reflect on in many respects.
Yeah, well, you had been living in Singapore for, I believe, 18 years, and you had planned a permanent return to your native England a few months ago, and now you're back in Singapore for your book launch. Have all those lockdowns, travel restrictions, I mean, this whole crazy pandemic that's, thrown our travel plans out the window, has it affected your own plans with regard to your own personal and professional life?
Oh, yes, absolutely it has, Stanley. You know, what do they say? The best laid plans. The reason I went to the UK in March was to find an apartment, furnish it and move in on the 1st of April and then come back to Singapore, have a fabulous leaving party and go back to England in May. Sadly, COVID-19 had different plans and I'd only been in the UK about 2 weeks when the situation became much worse and I had to say, do I stay in England and risk being in lockdown with no home, or do I come back to Singapore? So I got a plane back as soon as I can. And it's actually quite funny because the final chapter of Connecting the Dots is called Time to Move On. Well, I didn't even get a chance to do it, not when I wanted to. So now I'm working on Plan B, Stanley, and I'm hoping that by March 2021, I'll be able to really move on.
Now, Shirley, let's talk about the book. Compared to your previous books, which were about communication, this one seems more motivational in nature. Is that right?
It is actually, yeah. I talk about the opportunity to write a book coming out of the blue because I'd never dreamed of writing a book in anything. But yeah, this book in particular it's about my turning points in my life that have helped me to grow. And the people are the dots along my way that were very significant in those turning points.
Right. And when you look at those dots, if you like, which actually signify people, standing alone, they don't seem to be that significant or meaningful. But when you actually, like you say, connect the dots, it does, put together a story, a tapestry where you see one flowing into the other. And that's what brings about a whole story, a life story, which you have lived, and you continue, of course, to be connecting the dots. Is that why you feel that it's really meaningful to do this practice of connecting dots?
It is definitely. It was Steve Jobs who said, you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect the dots looking backwards. And that's exactly what I did. And in the final chapter of my book, I connect all the 12 dots from each of the 12 chapters to reveal the common thread that runs through all my key turning points. Now, I'm not going to spill the beans here because I don't want readers to know the crunch line here. I don't want to let you know exactly what the common thread is, but I'll just say here that this common thread that I discovered from connecting my dots is proving even more important now, given the challenges that the whole human race is facing with this global pandemic.
Right. And what can readers take away from your book when it comes to these dots or important events in their life, which may not be that important when they are experiencing it at the time?
You know what? I talk about so many things we learn in my book about getting out of the comfort zone, about how passion will lead to our purpose, how we've got to grab opportunities while we can. And hopefully readers, from reading my stories and from reading the stories from 12 guest contributors as well, they'll realize, if Shirley from Sheffield can do this, so can I.
So can the Susans from Singapore.
Absolutely. Indeed,
Yeah. So, well, part of your book, you did cover comfort zones. So let's do a little bit of a teaser here about what comfort zones are that you mentioned in your book. And you say that, you want to challenge readers apparently not to stay put in their comfort zones. But aren't comfort zones a good thing?
You know what, Stanley? I've been struggling with comfort zones from a very early age, and dealing with getting out of my comfort zone is something that I constantly have to kick myself up the you-know-where for. I'm not really sure that there's anything good about being in a comfort zone, because when you're in a comfort zone, there's no stress, there's no worries, everything's familiar, you're doing work that's manageable, it's not pushing you too far. But as a good friend of mine, Nishant Kasibatla, who shares in my book, as he says, there's no growth in the comfort zone. Now, I could have stayed in my comfort zone so many times. In chapter 2, I talk about something that happened in 1981 that really pushed me to the limits. But what happened then was I got out of my comfort zone. I pushed myself. I achieved success. I was super, super happy about it. And then I became more confident and I became a risk taker. And the great thing about this is the more that cycle repeats itself, the bigger risks you take. So again, going back to my good friend Nishant Kasibatla, in chapter 2, he says, you have to get out of the comfort zone and move into the growth zone.
All right. Sounds like comfort zones can be death valleys if we stay too long in that zone.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Now, also for women listeners, they might be interested in some space that you've also devoted to talking about women and change and women's blind spots. What's important for women to recognize in this regard?
Yes. In chapter 3, I wanted to share an interview that I'd held with a women's leadership expert, Sally Helgeson. And I'm just so blessed that people that I approached to share things in my book just said, yes, Shirley, of course. So one example that Sally gives is that women tend to they take feedback to heart and they feel bad about it. Now, I know from personal experience, this was very true for me. For example, when I was president of Asia Professional Speakers, I wanted to crawl under the table and cry when I received feedback. But I learned to crawl away from the table and toughen up and feel grateful to the person for giving me the feedback and then turn it into a positive. And that certainly has helped me become stronger and not weaker. So that's one of the blind spots. And I think there's something else that I think it's worth mentioning here, Stanley, and that's the imposter zone. I think a lot of men as well as women suffer from the imposter syndrome. And I've suffered this from all my life. I even suffer from it today. I'm going to put my hand up. It's like, me, I'm just Shirley from Sheffield. Me, how can I write a book? And that's continued all my life. But you know what I've learned? I've learned that we have to change the script because we are worthy. And that's what's important. Just changing that narrative sometimes in our head. We all are worthy.
And tell us about the importance of collaborations and teamwork and how it's helped your career.
You know, Whelan, I'll never forget my dad coming home from work many a day telling us about some colleagues who've been promoted. And they became what my dad called the big I am. They lord their new position over people like my dad who were once their friends. So when I lived in Bahrain, I called my mom and dad to tell them that I'd been promoted to head of department. And my dad said, just because Shirley's left Sheffield, it doesn't mean she should forget her roots. Don't you become the big I am. That was me with my Sheffield accent. So, you know, I think we can all work together so much more when we work as a team. And that's exactly what I did then, taking my dad's advice. I didn't just sit in my own office as head of department. I got my colleague to come and sit in there with me. We shared everything. We ran the department together, and I shared the responsibility with her, and I also acknowledged the support that she gave me. There's a great story in my quote and a quote from Frederick Harron that says, leadership is about getting everyone to feel that they are better together.
Better together. I like that. We are speaking with Shirley Taylor, and Shirley's just written a brand new book, which officially will only be launched in a couple of days, but we are giving you a preview as to what her book is about. It's titled Connecting the Dots to Inspire the Leader in You. Now, Shirley, you've also got a section in that book about leading from the heart, not the head. Why is this important to include in the book?
It's something that I've always been really passionate about in my speaking and training. You know, we talked about me writing communication and email books. So I've always talked about communicating with heart, really putting feeling into whatever we do. But I believe as a leader or an aspiring leader, one of the key qualities a leader needs in abundance is trust. And if there's no trust, there's bound to be conflict and division. And Stephen Covey once said, trust is the glue of life, the foundational principle that holds all relationships. So I think leading with heart and being trustworthy is something that leaders and aspiring leaders need to show every day and not just talk about it, but walk their talk. And in chapter 9, I share many ways that individuals can do this. And one of them is by showing vulnerability. Andrea Edwards also shares in this chapter that on social media too, people want you to lead with heart and show your true, authentic self. And when you do, when leaders particularly show your true, authentic selves, this will help build up your brand and your organization's brand.
Right. So you don't have to always, show like you know the answers to everything, that you're able to call the shots, and
yes.
You are the great I am, like you say.
Exactly. And, show some humility. Just because we climb the ladder, we've got to show humility and don't be egotistical and accept that, this is a mistake. I made a mistake, and own up to that mistake if necessary, and take in accountability for any errors so people can see the real you, and then they're more likely to trust you in return.
Sounds like the current tennis superstar Novak Djokovic, who had that incident, which you might be aware of. And he did own up on social media to apologize to what he did to that lines judge.
How perfect. That's a great example, Stanley.
Now, your last section about letting go is also very relevant in our times when physical and economic health are under threat from the pandemic. It's caused all sorts of upheaval and disruption to our lives and our jobs as well. So what's most important about learning to let go in order to make more advancements?
And isn't that, I really think this is true. You know, everything has changed so quickly for so many people this year. Let's look at me, for example. I'm staying in Singapore right now, even though I'd planned on living in England right now. After conducting face-to-face live training all over Asia for the last 2 decades, suddenly there's no live events anywhere. Speakers and trainers all over the world started setting up home studios, green screens, lights, cameras, switches, all this new tech and equipment. I tell you, Stanley, part of me at that point thought, no, I'm too old for this. I can't be doing all this, seriously. But what did I do? I took a deep breath. I cleared out my guest room. I got a green screen. Now, isn't it true we have to get out of the comfort zone into the growth zone? So I didn't go crazy, but I did get some new technology. And guess what? I am loving virtual training and speaking, and I've discovered I'm rather good at it. So yes, it's important to let go sometimes and move on, to take that leap of faith. And I'm so glad I have taken the leap of faith into the new virtual world. And I'm really loving it. But yeah, we got to get out of our comfort zone and move into the growth zone for as long as we truly can.
Awesome. And I like the fact that growth is also associated with the color green, green screen growth. Connecting the dots would also help us grow. Connecting the dots to inspire the leader in you is the title of a new book that Shirley Taylor, our guest, is launching this week. In fact, you can read more about it on her website at shirleytaylor.com, spelled SHIRLEYTAYLOR.com. And from there, you can click on books and you'll be able to read up on a little bit on the book and also even download a free e-sample on that book as well. Thanks, Shirley, for speaking with us. Wishing you much success as you continue to connect more dots for the path in front of you.
Thank you so much, both of you.